Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about access and high expectations in this video. So how do we balance both, really pushing the students to give it their all and really engage them in the math, but at the same time making sure, we're not excluding anybody or making it too hard. So the general goals when we're doing things in Math CEO that the team has come up with are build student interests, so really get students interested in mathematics and the process of math and how we can use math to explore the world. We want to engage them in mathematical reasoning, so we want them to get used to sort of the quantitative logic and sort of the questions that we ask and the language that we use. And then we also want to encourage student thinking to be extended, right? We want to, encourage them to ask their own questions about the topic. Like, what do you wonder? And really, you can go down a rabbit hole with really any of these activities. And of course, these are great goals, but they're difficult to get to. So how do we get there? Well, there's a general roadmap that we can follow. So the first step really is to build interest and motivation for what you're looking at, right? You can jump right into, equations and shapes, but if you don't know why you're doing it, it's not going to make a lot of sense. And then after that, after you've sort of established the why, you want to get into the intuition. So help build intuition. And we'll talk about strategies for building intuition in just a minute. Then from there, you want to solidify that understanding by sort of introducing some more, rigorous thinking. And then after that, you really want to, encourage them to ask their own questions and extend the thinking beyond just the basic scope of the activity. And as a bonus, if you can connect it to, access and voice, you really connect it to that culturally responsive teaching, that really also, is the cherry on top of all this. And, as you look at this general roadmap, I want to point out it's not linear. You're not going to just progress from, stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. They kind of end up blurring together and you sort of reference back to one or sort of, foreshadow the next and such. But these are sort of the general stages that happen when we're running an activity. So we're going to go through an example. I think the example we're going to go through are tilings. This was an activity we did in fall 2023. And the first step we want to do is building interest, right? So this first sheet here is meant to be building interest. And so we've got tilings, these pictures of tilings, and some questions. What is the same in these tilings? What do you think is different and why? So building interest is one of the hardest steps for me, but there's been a few strategies I've employed. So I find examples in the real world. So we've got some right here. Some pictures of some tilings. Looks like we've got a bathroom. We've got some floors here. And you really want to know, what makes these things cool? I asked one student what makes tilings cool, and who's a smart student. He said that tilings are cool because you use a simple shape to make a more complicated pattern. And I was like, oh, that is really cool, right? So what makes them cool? And connect to general student interest as well. In fall 2023, we had a lot of students who were interested in art. So tilings connect really well to art. How can you make really pretty art with a tiling? You could talk about MC Escher. So you really respond to student interest and try to engage them in their own interests. And, I came up with some of my own examples for tilings, right? So like a honeycomb, a bee honeycomb, that's an example of a tiling. And one of my favorite tilings is this Alhambra. So it's kind of hard to see, but this little Triskelion shape ends up tiling the whole thing. And they got some with stars and some with hexagons. Anyway, I think this one's really cool. So you can also connect it to your interest, and your interest will sort of bleed through, and the kids will pick up on it. So once you've established sort of the real world examples and the why of what you're doing, you want to go ahead and talk about establishing intuition. So pro tip from Randy, use kinematics. Use things that the students can manipulate and move around in real time. So for the tiling activity, we had these animal cutouts. And you were supposed to take these cutouts and trace them and see if you could sort of tile a piece of paper with these animal cutouts. And this really helps, build intuition for what a tiling is. It's a repetition of, this shape that has no gaps and no overlaps that cover the plane, right? And so you can really start to see, oh, I need to make sure there's no gaps, so the elephant has to be this way or the bird has to be this other way. And you can really start to ask questions like, oh, can we do this maybe by flipping it? And really start to work in some of those ideas, right? And while you're doing this process, make sure you reflect student language. Students are going to reach for words that aren't like the standard, words for things, but they're still perfectly good. So, flip instead of reflection, for example, or a spin instead of a rotation. Totally fine. Excellent for building intuition. So you can reflect student language, and that really helps them sort of engage. And then the next step, you can really sort of work in more complicated vocabulary. But for example, I just drew this shape. It kind of looks like a hummingbird. Can we tile with this shape? And I think we can, because we can take one of these shapes and we can keep extending it out, and it just kind of fits right into place. So you can like write your own shape. Let's ask, does this tile it? I don't know. Once you've sort of established intuition, then you want to go ahead and solidify that into understanding. So you want to sort of gradually ask more and more challenging questions and introduce some maybe more technical terms. Do note that if you introduce a new term, you should definitely define it. You should always define any new word you use. So you shouldn't just say, is it a tiling or not? I don't know what a tiling is. Oh, it's the repetition of this shape with no gaps or overlaps. Oh, okay. Yeah, and so you'll just kind of go through these questions, and they sort of work in the ideas that we want to encourage in this particular activity. Don't just lecture. These questions are really made for the students to engage in themselves. And you're certainly there to help them and explain things when they get stuck. But it's really tempting just to stand there and go through the activity with them, kind of lecturing through it. Try not to do that. Try to actually really let the kids think about the questions and sort of engage with them on their own. So, and you could ask more questions. What kind of shapes? Can we make them bigger? Can we smaller? What's the weirdest shape we can make that still tiles things, right? And that sort of leads into the next part, which is extending the thinking. So this is where we want to really encourage the curiosity and engage student interest, and really work with more challenging ideas. So this one involves finding more generators, and there's a bonus challenge about, 2 generators that don't work alone but work together. So these are really challenging questions. And part of your job as a mentor is to break it down into more manageable pieces and to really model breaking down those questions, those complicated questions, and to model productive struggle. So for example, I drew this shape. I was like, okay, well, I'm trying to come up with generators, right? So I drew this purple shape, and I'm like, okay, does it tile the Cairo tiling? I don't know. I actually don't think it does. I don't think this one works. It's hard to tell, but I don't think it works. And maybe it doesn't work, and that's okay. I tried, it doesn't work, and maybe I can learn from that, and I'll try again. So you can really model that productive struggle in front of your students. So don't afraid to be wrong in front of them. That's totally okay. And then, of course, don't forget to take the opportunity to tie this into culture. There's almost always an opportunity to tie this into culture or socioeconomic status, CRT, etc. So in the case of the Cairo tiling, it's named the Cairo tiling because it's often found in Cairo, Egypt. And so you could talk about Egypt. Like, what's your favorite Egyptian god? Kids know a lot about Egypt, and they're excited to talk about it, I'll tell you. But, you can connect it not just to Egypt. For example, here's a picture of the Cairo tiling. This was taken in Japan. So you could talk about it that way. So in the recap, the general outline is you want to build interest, establish intuition, solidify understanding, and then extend the thinking. But remember, it's nonlinear, and all these sort of steps blur together, and you'll reference back to some, but that's totally okay. In the end, all that matters is that everyone has fun and everyone learns just a little bit of math.